Welcome, people, and thank you for tuning in. This is the Sports Underground Podcast with Baron Graft.
The revolution will not be televised, not be televised.
And look who's coming up.
Do you know how I get up to my game? Do you know?
I have wrestled with an alligator. I done tussled with a whale. I done handcuffed lightning, throw thunder in jail.
That's the winner!
And now, from Hotbox Studios in Burbank, California, which is literally an 8x10 box in Baron's garage, your host, Baron Graft.
Hey, what is happening, folks? It's the Sports Underground, episode number 49, the Ron Guidry episode, the Sports Underground, the Gator, Louisiana Lightning, Ron Guidry, legendary New York Yankees pitcher, Cy Young Award winner, four-time All-Star, Ron Guidry. There you go. You might notice there's a little bit of a new feel to the Underground. Got a new intro song, as we do every month. We start over with a new song. The song is Foo Fighters, Enough Space. Because I'll tell you what, folks, for the next month, there just isn't going to be enough space in this show. We got the NFL. We got college football. We got Major League Baseball playoffs. We got the NHL going. And if anything happens with the NBA lockout talks, we're going to talk about that too. Plus, we start mixing in your questions, your comments. Just not enough space in this show. So we're going to jump right in. I honestly watched more sports this weekend than I really think is probably healthy. I think my wife certainly thinks is probably more than is really healthy. I watched a ton of sports. Watched a ton of baseball. Watched a ton of football. So I'm a little loopy. I'm just telling you right now, I'm a little loopy. Some great stuff to get to tonight. Starting in the NFL, some great games this weekend. Just some unbelievable stuff happened in the NFL. The game of the week, I'm giving it to you. I told you that the game to watch was Sunday night. I gave you a runner-up was the Lions and the Cowboys, and let me tell you something. The Detroit Lions visiting the Dallas Cowboys, that is a game that did not disappoint. The way the Cowboys played in the first half of that game, I'm telling you what, man, even people in Detroit, faithful, longtime Lions fans that have suffered, they watched the first half of that game and they thought, this is over. We're finished. But nothing's ever over. That's why you have to play the second half. And I'll tell you what, that Lions team just keeps finding a way to win. And look, a lot of that game is directly as a result of having Calvin Johnson. If there's any question as to whether or not Calvin Johnson is the best wide receiver in football right now, I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear who you put ahead of Megatron, because he's the reason they won that game. Well, I'll say he's the reason that Detroit won that game. I'm not sure if Detroit won that game as much as the Cowboys lost that game, but they came away with the W, and it's because of the efforts of Calvin Johnson. I mean, there were a couple of balls Stafford just threw up there, and he went and got them. You got to love that kind of effort. And it's funny because earlier in the week, Rob Ryan, the defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys, said, "Oh, Calvin Johnson, he'd be the third best receiver on the Dallas Cowboys." Really? Really, Rob? Are you for real? Get a haircut, first of all. You look like Santa Claus's cousin, bro. Get a haircut. And stop making reckless comments. I know you're trying to fire people up, but it backfired on you this week. And I'll tell you, the thing that I really took away from this game, I've been a strong supporter of Tony Romo for a very long time. I've listened to a lot of criticism and stood up for Tony Romo for a very long time. Jerry Jones, the Cowboys owner, after the game said, I still have faith in Tony Romo. What happened today is not wavering in my faith. And I part ways with Jerry Jones on this one. Because here's the thing. What I watched happen on Sunday when the Lions beat the Cowboys I watched Tony Romo throw that game away. And I've supported this guy through thick and thin. I supported him when they lost to the Jets, and he threw a costly interception there. I've supported him when people said that he couldn't win in the playoffs. I've supported him for a very long time. And at some point in time, you have to look at it for what it is. And before, you could always say, well, you know, he had Wade Phillips. And Wade Phillips isn't exactly an offensive-minded coach. He didn't have great ideas on the offensive side of the ball. So you can kind of put it off on Wade Phillips. Now he's got Jason Garrett, so that excuse is gone. And I know you can say, well, he had, you know, there were a lot of injuries and he was missing his best players and Miles Austin wasn't there. I get that. But the interceptions that he threw that were the turning points in that game are inexcusable. You cannot throw those balls if you're going to be a top quarterback in the NFL. That's all there is to it. And really what it comes down to is, we've known for a long time. I've said that I thought that Romo was good, not great. That, you know, he definitely didn't belong in the conversation of elite quarterbacks in the NFL. But I'm telling you what, watching him throw that game away to the Lions came to the stark realization, I don't think he's even in the upper half of the quarterbacks of the league. And you put it to the acid test. The acid test is this. Would you trade the starting quarterback for most NFL teams straight up for Tony Romo? And you can just run through it. He's definitely not even the best quarterback in the NFC East. You wouldn't trade him straight up for Eli Manning. I wouldn't trade him straight up for Michael Vick. And at this point, it's a push with Rex Grossman. I might trade him straight up with Rex Grossman at the Redskins. But the Redskins beat the Rams this weekend, and the Rams are lowly. They haven't won a game, but Grossman managed the game well. And Romo did not manage the game well, so that's a push. In the NFC West, would you trade him straight up for the Kevin Kolb at the Cardinals? Maybe. Okay, so the Niners would trade Alex Smith for Tony Romo. The Seahawks would trade Tavares Jackson for Tony Romo. The Rams might, maybe they might trade Sam Bradford for Tony Romo. There's no team in the NFC South. Matt Ryan at the Falcons. Cam Newton at the Panthers. Drew Brees at the Saints. Josh Freeman at the Buccaneers. You wouldn't trade any of those guys straight up for Tony Romo. The NFC North. Okay, so you would trade him for Jay Cutler at this point. You wouldn't trade him for Matthew Stafford. You wouldn't trade him for Aaron Rodgers. And yeah, whoever the Vikings are trotting out there, sure, you'll trade him for that. In the AFC, you might trade him for Ryan Fitzpatrick for the Bills, but maybe not. The Dolphins, yes, they have a problem at quarterback. The Patriots, no. The Jets, no. The Broncos in the AFC West now. The Broncos, yeah, okay, you'll trade him for Orton. The Chiefs, yeah, okay. You'd trade him for Matt Castle. The Raiders, yeah, you'd trade him for Jason Campbell. The Chargers, nope. Wouldn't trade him for Phillip Rivers. In the AFC South, the Texans, I wouldn't trade him straight up for Matt Schaub. The Colts, this year, yes, I'd trade him for Kerry Collins or Curtis Painter. But if Peyton Manning comes back, that's a no. The Jaguars, yes, you'd trade him straight up for whoever's starting this week. The Titans, maybe. Maybe you might trade him for Hasselbeck, maybe. In the AFC North, the Ravens, no. Joe Flacco, despite the fact that he completely gave the game away to the Jets this weekend, I still wouldn't trade him straight up for Romo. The Bengals, yes, okay, you'd trade him for Andy Dalton. The Browns, maybe. You might trade him for Colt McCoy. You might not. The Steelers, no, you don't trade him for Ben Roethlisberger. And if you count that up, and that is over half of the teams in the NFL that you would not make that trade or you would think about not making that trade. It's close to 2/3. And all of the teams that you would trade your quarterback straight up for Tony Romo are teams that have problems at quarterback. So what that tells me is the Cowboys have a problem at quarterback. And they better address it. And the reason Jerry Jones will support Tony Romo is because he doesn't have a choice at this point. John Kitna is not going to get it done. But I would say if you're the Cowboys next year in the draft, you got to start looking for who's next. Under the heading of Players of the Week in the NFL, I'm going to split it again. I'm going to give the award to two players here. I'm going with Frank Gore and Matt Hasselbeck. Frank Gore, the running back for the San Francisco 49ers. They edged the Philadelphia Eagles. That's actually a pretty good statement. The Philadelphia Eagles. Yeah, that might be more accurate. Gore went for 127 yards, scored the go-ahead touchdown. This guy's just a grinder. You know, and much like Frank Gore, Matt Hasselbeck's a guy that everybody has written off. He's put out to pasture in Tennessee. Went for 220 yards and 3 touchdowns in a win over the Browns, and nobody thought they were going to win. Everybody said, oh, Kenny Britt's hurt. Wide receiver for the Titans, the number 1 option. He's hurt. There's no way they can win. Well, Hasselbeck did it. Put the team on his back. So after this weekend, we got the Lions and the Packers are unbeaten. Still got Miami, Minnesota, and St. Louis looking for their first win. I really like this Lions team. And even though the Pack boat raced the Broncos, I still think they're going to have a letdown game sooner or later. They've just been on too big of a run. You got to let up somewhere. The game we told you was the game of the week on the Friday show was the Ravens at the Jets. And let me tell you something. This lived up to the bill for me, but that's because I like defensive football. And these two teams, I mean, their defense were better than the offense for either team. Their defense has scored most of the points. But the coffin nail, let me tell you something. This Baltimore Ravens team should scare a lot of people. Because even though Flacco didn't play well, that defense picked up the ball and ran with it at every opportunity. And they answered the call. And none more important than with just under 9 minutes left in the third quarter, they got a pick 6 off of the Jets and Mark Sanchez. But this was the play. This was immediately after Flacco had fumbled the ball. They turn it back over to the defense. And what do? They go get a huge pick 6. They get pressure on Sanchez, get a pick 6, going the other way. Game time. So that's that. And the other game that I took notice of that I watched the Patriots and the Raiders. And I'll tell you something. Jason Campbell is the only part of that Raiders team that's really a problem. If you look at that team, they got a really good team put together there. That's one quarterback away from being a really good football team. You know? And unfortunately, they drafted Jamarcus Russell in 2007. They should have drafted a better quarterback. I don't know who was out there. But they've had pretty good drafts. With the exception of Jamarcus Russell, they drafted Darren McFadden in 2008. They drafted Darius Hayward-Bay in 2009. You know, it's interesting. They drafted a linebacker in 2010. Tim Tebow and Colt McCoy were both out there. And I got to believe that if Colt McCoy was the quarterback of the Oakland Raiders, I got to believe they'd look a little bit better right now than they do. I got to believe that that's a team that's probably winning the AFC West if they have Colt McCoy. But, Jason Campbell threw some bad interceptions in this game. Threw an interception in the end zone. You just can't do it. And that's why I don't trust this guy. That's why I can never go all the way with this guy. I just can't. I just can't see it. Under the miscellaneous heading of other news in the NFL, I don't know if you saw this or not, but Devin Hester returned a punt for a touchdown. That's the 11th punt return for a touchdown in his career. That's an NFL record. So that's something else, man. That guy is electric, and that's another team. That's a Chicago team that I honestly think is one quarterback away from being a much better football team, winning a lot more games. Saw a bit of the Pittsburgh and Houston game, and as I expected, Pittsburgh looked really long in the tooth. I have a suspicion, okay? I have a suspicion that Troy Polamalu will have a better year next year than he did this year. And here's why. As I watch Polamalu, I see him taking angles he used to take, and he's just a little bit slower than he used to be. Just not quite the same player he was. And I think he's going to grow and he's going to learn because he's a smart football player. I think next year he'll be better. He'll stop taking those crazy angles. Also, under the Michael Vick heading, Big Ben got hit in the head, got his helmet ripped off. So you're not the only one, Mike. just in case you wanted to know. So that's the NFL.